mean, people are really fearing what's going to happen to their gas and electricity bills, not just next month, but also again in October. And people are just not going to be able to meet them. I knock on doors every Sunday morning, and the absolute anxiety of people is going through the roof. So why would you not have a windfall tax on the gas and electricity companies when the gas companies, the chief executive of British Gas said they had more money than they knew what to do with? Sorry, not British Gas, but some of the gas companies, they don't know what to do with the profits they're actually making. Well, I've got a good idea. Why not help those people who are facing great trouble paying their bills?
Richard Thompson of the SNP, what was your reaction to the Spring statement?
Similar to Siobhan's, it was very much, is that it? I mean, the Chancellor could not have been unaware of the grave concerns about how the cost of living crisis was hitting people. He couldn't have been unaware of the impact of measures that had already been taken, such as the removal of the £20 a week universal credit uplift was having on some of the most vulnerable. He couldn't have been unaware of rising energy prices and the impact of rising fuel prices pushing through in terms of general inflation, not least because everything that we buy in the shops has at one stage been in the back of a lorry or a train or a van. And instead, he came away with sort of three measures: a 5 pence cut to fuel duty. Now, given that across most of the UK, prices at the forecourt had gone up by at least 30 pence a litre, I don't know what he thought that was going to do. It was only taking prices back to where they'd been the previous week. We got a 0% VAT concession on energy-saving home improvements, but, frankly, if you're already struggling to pay your utility bills, goodness knows where he expects you to find the money to find a ground source heat pump or solar panels. The one bit I did welcome, in as so far as it went, was the U-turn on national insurance, which at least takes the edge off it, but it still represents a tax increase and a breach of the Conservatives' manifesto promises not to increase national insurance or income tax. But the real disappointment for me is, knowing all of these things, he had an unprecedented amount of headroom within which to operate. He had about £30 billion of headroom through a combination of forecast borrowing, which hadn't been used, and increased tax revenues, largely as a result of fiscal drag. And he's held all that back at a time when people are absolutely desperate. And the blunt reality is that if you woke up in the morning of the Spring statement worried about how you were going to pay your energy bills, you would have gone to bed that night with exactly the same set of worries in your mind.
Tobias Ellwood, I mean, it's a very, very difficult Spring statement for the Chancellor, the biggest fall in living standards since rationing in the Second World War. I mean, what was your assessment of it from a Conservative point of view?
You touched on it in the opening commentary, the backdrop that any government would be facing here, given COVID, that £400 billion bill. Richie Sunak came up with some interesting, innovative fiscal instruments during COVID to support businesses. The furlough system, for example, was copied across the world. I would like to have seen an instrument which would have seen us pay off this £400 billion bill over the next 50 years, in the very way that we treated the war debt from the Second World War. It was actually paid off during Gordon Brown's time, I think, when he was Prime Minister. It meant that it didn't impact on all the Whitehall departments, and that's what we're seeing today. So on top of that, you then have these other global factors, which include, obviously, the energy and fuel and indeed food. Now, ironically, those are the very three things that the war in Ukraine is actually feeding as well, is causing them to rise. And the one piece that I really wanted to see was an increase in defence spending, because our world is going to get more dangerous. There is an opportunity for Britain to lead, but we remain on a peacetime budget of 2.2%. And he could have done it in imaginative ways, but he couldn't have given indications. This goes back to that diplomatic language that we just touched on, that perhaps wasn't used so wisely by President Biden, but it would have been an indication to President Putin that we were serious about European security, about European leadership. And I think a trick was missed there, not to make a point of this. I suspect we'll go around this boy in months or maybe even sooner, and we will eventually see an increase in defence spending.
This morning, the former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Sedwill, told Times Radio that he wanted to see a 4% spent of GDP on national security. Tobias Ellwood, do you agree with that?
Well, I started at 3%, but it's 3% of GDP. And if your GDP is falling, then you're not going to be able to spend the amount of money. Don't forget that the integrated review, this big study that I know Robert Fox spent an awful lot of time writing about in 2001, this checking our defense posture, it actually ended up with a third of our tank fleet being cut, loss of our armored fighting vehicles, 10,000 troops being removed. Our F-35s reduced from 138 down to just 48. This is reducing our conventional forces. And fine, we spilled into getting better at cyber and space. But ultimately, because we had to spend on those, we then had to cut our 3 conventional budgets. And it does mean that our armed forces are now well and truly overstretched. We've just sent a whole batch more of combat troops to the Baltics. That we can't. This isn't an enduring rotation of troops that we can muster at the moment. We're going to have to spend more on defence. There's no doubt about it.
And Robert Fox, what's your take on the spring statement and this idea of spending more on defence? As I said, the former cabinet secretary's pitching for 4% of GDP and making that point about really investing in people and hardware again.
I split it. I'll answer your question first, because I'm not a politician, is that I thought that the body language of this statement was appalling. He put in some reforms, he put in some sugaring of the pill, but coming from this man with this posture and saying that he was going to cut income tax in a year or two's time in the run-up for the general election, which I'm rather surprised the 3 panelists didn't allude to, I thought that that was appalling. And that brought in the harvest of the bad headlines. The Treasury is an animal which is pretty conservative. And in fact, so much so, to get into the second part, that it was leaked to the FT that Rishi Sunak was actually looking for a cut in the defence budget. Now, I'm going to disagree with all my colleagues. And with Mark Sedwill, whom I know well. It's not about money. The trouble is that you could do an awful lot of reform with what you've got. It's just that defence has been handled so very, very, very badly. Right through the card, from the politicians to the civil service and the commanders, there are things, not a quick fix, but a rapid reform is needed now, and it can be done. Sorry, I'm quoting my column in the Standard on Friday. The Australians did it when they realised that war was now becoming a distinct possibility in the Pacific. They turned their white paper of 2016 on its head and got a brilliant document out in 2020. And last year, the Finns did the same thing. We've got to do better with what we've got and improve it for what we need to do. And what we need to do is in Europe. And I think that that was the thing that was so, we hadn't really nailed it from the meetings in Brussels, the 3 summits of the 35 thing, was how irrelevant Britain was. You just saw the body language of Biden walking past Boris Johnson, because when the EU is now going to lead on security in Eastern Europe, and we have to work with that.